Hello and welcome to today's KDP University's At Home with AG Riddle. I'm Trisha, and for the past 5 years, I've moved around Amazon's books teams, learning the business so I can share it with authors. But we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk to Jerry. AG Riddle spent 10 years starting an internet company before retiring in 2013, and then to his true passion, writing fiction. After his best-selling debut novel, The Atlantis Gene, Riddle has released 9 books, which have been translated into 20 languages and sold worldwide. Several of these novels are now in development for future films. Riddle lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with his wife, who endures his various idiosyncrasies in return for being the first to read his new novels. No matter where he is or what's going on, he tries his best to set aside time every day to answer emails and messages from his readers. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So exciting. There we go. Let's see if I can get my technology to work today. So let's start off by a little background. When did you decide that being an author was your calling? How'd you get started?
Well, my first book came out in 2013, but it took me 2.5 years to write that first novel. And, I started an internet company in college and did that for, as you said in the intro, 10 years. And I was a little burnt out on it. I mean, I enjoyed certain parts of the job and not really others. And after 10 years, I sort of reflected and said, what do I like about this and what is bothering me? And the thing that I loved in my life was reading. I mean, I'd come home from work and read, and at that time, I started reading self-published authors, and I thought, maybe this is something I should be doing, and so that's what sort of led me to writing. I published that first book really as an experiment, to see where it would go, and I thought, if this takes off, I'll keep doing it, and if it doesn't, go do something else.
There you go. Well, good news, it took off. Now, it took off rather quickly, which is unusual, right?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I've been a little surprised at how well the books have done, and I mean, been very fortunate and surprised. But I think, that was 2013, and I think things are tougher now, but I think it's still easily possible. And I think,
Mhm.
one of the reasons I spent 2.5 years on the first book is that I knew myself. I knew if the book really didn't gain a lot of traction, that I would sort of lose interest and want to go do something else. So I really wanted to give writing the best shot I could. I wanted
Mhm.
to really figure out if it's something I should be doing. And so a lot of that first release was built around that. I mean, it was a book that was multi-genre, and I think it was in a genre that was underserved, and I felt like it was a book that I could write, sort of uniquely qualified to write. But yeah, it took off pretty quickly.
So let's talk about that's a unique term that it was an underserved genre. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you identified it?
Yeah, so the genre that I really loved to read was space adventure and space exploration and space opera. But I felt like there were a lot of really good books in that genre and good
Mhm.
writers, and I thought I could do it pretty well. But I felt like techno thrillers and these books that were really research heavy, there weren't as many books in the market, and they're tougher books to write. I mean, it takes um, a lot of time to do the research. I think a lot of discipline, and um, you know, part of my career in startups was that when we started, we were software developers that would look for partners and look for niches to go into, and so I had a little bit of background in science, from college and working in clinical trials, but also just from working on a lot of different things and learning new things, and I also felt like when I started in my career writing that I wouldn't be the best at plotting or dialogue or pacing or whatever, but I thought I could be really good at the science and history, and that's something
Mhm.
I felt very confident about. And so getting into techno thrillers and books that were rich in science and history is something that I felt like was a natural fit. It
Mhm.
wasn't, and I think it was just my experience as a reader of saying, these are books that I love, and there's not enough of them out there. And I
Right.
think that's worth, frankly, a lot more than any report you're going to buy on the market or any sort of scientific, this is an underserved market. It's like I'm a big believer, and I think those things can have some level of utility, but I think ultimately, if you are the reader that you're targeting, it makes your life a lot easier, right? It's like
Right.
there's no perseveration and charts and graphs, and it's just like this is what you should be writing.
Right. And because it keeps your interest, because it's something that you enjoy. And to your point, if you have to do a lot of research, hopefully you're researching something you're interested in.
Well, that's right. Yeah, because I think if you're working on whether it's a research-heavy novel or just something that is not, it can get pretty laborious if you're not really into it. And especially for the kind of books I'm writing that take sometimes years to write, you got to really be into it.
Hmm. So you've written 9 books and you started publishing in 2013. I'm not going to try and do the math, but it's a little bit more than 1 book per year. Am I correct?
Yeah, I started writing in 2011, so it's let's call it a
Oh,
book a
okay.
year.
Book a year. Okay. Um, so how do you keep your readers engaged from one book to another if you're just publishing once a year?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think my pace is obviously not terribly common among independent authors, and I think
Hmm.
advertising really is about the only solution. I mean, I have an email list, and I email them really when the book comes out, or if there's something really remarkable, if we're doing some kind of sale or giveaway of books. But they might get 2 or 3 emails a year from me. And
Hmm.
then Facebook, I'm not a terribly social person personally, so I don't post a lot. I should, and like I've seen all the seminars that say what you should do, but it doesn't really fit my personality. So, but I think advertising for me anyway is what's been this sort of bridged the gap and kept people engaged.
And I think that that's a really good call out is don't try to force yourself to do things that you're not going to do. So social media, if that's not your thing, then find some, there's so many different marketing opportunities. Find something that will work for you. And so you found advertising. And a little bird has told me that you're really, really good at it. So I figure we're going to take some time to dig into this a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So when you start advertising, kind of tell us your process. How do you start advertising a book?
Well, I think for me anyway, advertising is something that I'm constantly trying to figure out, and I'm not sure I've got it figured out. So that's a caveat. Hopefully there's a warning or a sort of a sets the stage. But I think there's little question that advertising works, and I think that the questions become, at what bid price does it work, and what works for my genre. And so I think
Mhm.
the caution I would provide is that a lot of the advice you read are people saying, look, this worked for me, and I think what is incumbent upon us as advertisers is to say, that worked for them. Is my situation similar? And when was this advice given? And then, and I think also looking at it through the lens of your business and where you are, right? Like I think the person that has a 10-book series and is at the end of their career and don't plan to write a lot more books, maybe has a different outlook on advertising than someone that has 1 book and has just started, right? So that's a long way to say, what I use is AMS and then Amazon managed services, which are the lock screen ads. And those are the 2 things. And, I've used Facebook ads before, but for my particular genre, it doesn't really seem to work, or maybe I haven't put in the effort. But with regard to AMS, which is what I've probably spent the most time on, I think my opinion is that you can drive yourself crazy trying to absolutely figure it out. But I think there's probably
Right.
80% of the value in 20% of the time that you spend. And so these are the points that I would make. I think you need an auto campaign, um, and I would strongly advise people to write a custom text ad for the auto campaign. So don't just do an ad that has your book. And I think um, the custom text is going to do a few things. I think that some people would say get the click. You want as many clicks as possible. My opinion is that you ought to write custom text for that ad that qualifies the reader, that even if it doesn't get as many clicks, what you really want is a high conversion rate. That is what, frankly, I think Amazon cares about with regard to advertising. They like the clicks and they like to make revenue from advertising, but what they really want is to send readers to a book that they're going to like. They make more from selling books than they do from advertising, I think. But and so I think that, rather than writing custom text that says, XYZ, click here, this is the best, you need this. I think say something about the plot, or say something about how the book is unique, or perhaps even say something that might disqualify a group of readers. Because I think if you have a high conversion rate, that ad is going to be served more and you're going to get better profits. The other thing I would say with regard to auto ads is that you should negate your author name and your book names and your series names. And I think that's really important. And then what I would do is break out those terms into a separate campaign. You just call it branded or defensive or whatever you want to call it. And so that's really going to give you insight into what net new customers are costing you and what your existing customer base is costing you. And I think you should be paying far less for advertising to readers who are already familiar with your brand and your books, right? If you're doing it right. And I think additionally, you want to separate that out because you want to know what new customers are costing you, and you might be willing to bid more for a new customer than an existing customer. And I think when you leave everything in there, you think, oh, my ACOS is 100%, and I'm happy with that, or it's 80%. But realistically, your ACOS for new customers is this. Your ACOS for existing customers is this. I mean, there's more I could say about advertising, but I think that using custom text and using text that attracts the right readers is important, and then splitting out your defensive ads is a pretty good start and gets you pretty far down the road.
Okay, so we're getting a lot of questions about what is AMS. So just to kind of clarify, Amazon advertising used to be called AMS. So for those authors that have been with us a while, I think
a little bit.
Yeah, so it's still Amazon advertising, and if you're in your KDP bookshelf and you have a published book, you can go through the advertising from there and get to your AMS account. Or see, I'm doing it now. So your Amazon advertising. I know, I'll hear about that. But the other term that you used, I think is an interesting term that people are not familiar with, and that's the ACOS.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how you use it?
Yeah, so ACOS is average cost of a sale, and I think they've added ROAS, which is return on ad spend, to Amazon advertising. I guess there's Amazon advertising console, which is where you're going to find what I'm referring to with auto ads is sponsored products, right? So SP. And then you've got now in KDP sponsor brands, and then you've got the self-serve lock screen ads. So ACOS is your average cost of a sale. And I think there's some things to keep in mind about ACOS. If I advertise my book and my book costs $9.99, and I spend $10, let's just say I bid $1 a click and I get 10 clicks and I sell one book, your ACOS is going to be 100%. So Amazon will say, you sold $10 in goods and you spent $10 getting that sale. I think the thing that you've got to remember as an advertiser is that there's two very important points about ACOS. And the first is that you don't actually get the $10. You get 70% of that, and then you, depending on your file size, you're, I think 70% of whatever the delivery cost is. So let's just call it 67. You get $6.70. And so I think the thing to keep in mind is that if you have, the most important thing to me about advertising has nothing to do with your bid prices or your keywords or how you're set up or your custom text. I think it has to do with what happens to that reader at the end of the book. And if we've done our jobs, what they want to do is read another book from you, whether it's from another series or the next book in that series. And we can measure that. I mean, you can measure it in terms of your total revenue every month, or your read through, or the ranks of the the other books, but that is the most important thing, right? And so people
Hmm.
increasingly, we spend money on things, but time is the most important thing we spend. And so readers, especially unlimited readers, they choose how to spend their time. And I think if they feel like at the end of the book they've spent their time on something, um, and they feel good about the decision, they go on to the next book. So getting back to ACOS, when you look at your ACOS, I think what you have to really have in mind is how likely is this person that I've brought into my catalog likely to keep reading? And if they're likely to
Yeah.
keep reading and you're advertising a series, you obviously can tolerate a higher ACOS. I mean, people
Hmm.
that have 10 plus book series sometimes tolerate ACOS of 500%, or just crazy, high numbers. And I
Right.
think if you're advertising a standalone, it's a little different.
Hmm.
So I think, knowing what sort of read through you have for your series and your catalog is important when looking at your ACOS.
Hmm. I think that that's really great information. So what I'm hearing from you is, one, determine which book you're in the series. If you have a series, determine which book you're advertising, and then look at the return for that book, because instead you're looking at a return for the entire series, and maybe take a look at splitting that ACOS and then looking at splitting it throughout the entire series, which may give you a better understanding of what your actual, cost for that ad is.
That's
Um,
fair. Yeah, fair. I agree with that.
we've got some questions that are coming through. So I usually don't get into the questions this early, but I think that we're getting into some really technical stuff that's amazing. So I want to make sure that we're clarifying all of this because it's really applicable. Um, so when you're doing an ad campaign, do you have a perpetual ad campaign going, or do you just do ad campaigns right before a launch?
Well, so I run ads all the time,
Hmm.
and I've sort of gone through phases where like I set my ads up this way, and I'm like, well, is this really working? And
Hmm.
wasn't really sure, and you sort of learn things over time. And Amazon, I think, is constantly trying to improve the ad platform, and they're making tweaks that you need to keep up with. I will say that I think if your campaigns run longer, it's better. They develop a sales history, and the ad campaigns do benefit immensely from learning where to show your ads, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm actually, and I don't know if this is the right approach in the market, because I hear from people that basically when they launch a book, they go out with ads and are
Right.
fairly aggressive early. My tendency has been to wait. Like I have two trilogies and a duology and a standalone book. I tend to
Uh-huh.
wait. Like this last release, I waited until the trilogy was done to really turn up ads. And the reason was I felt like my readers tend to wait a little for series to be done to binge read them.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I felt like there was more return. We talk about ACOS. Um, Getting someone into that trilogy, there was a lot more return on you getting them in when the three books were out than getting
Mhm.
someone in. And at current, we don't really have a good way to retarget. So if someone comes in, they read book one, and then months go by, and then book two comes out, you don't really have a good way. I mean, there's sponsored display, like that's coming, but not here yet. There's not a good way to say, hey, you read book one, here's book
Mhm.
two,
Mhm.
it's available now, right? So I tend to wait,
Right.
but I think it's worth doing some base level of advertising when the book comes out. You're going to get
Uh-huh.
likely more return when the book comes out.
Right.
This is what I do.
I think that that's an excellent call out to your point that people are just like Netflix. People are binge watching and they're binge reading. So it's really interesting to take that kind of long-term approach to it, saying, all right, I'm going to publish all of these books first, and then I'm going to double down on my advertising and
Yeah,
really focus on that. Really good. Thank you for sharing that. All of that information is really great. I think it's really helpful to hear from somebody who's found success. And to your point, everybody's going to be a little different. So just because this is what's working for you, it doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, but it's to your other point, it's kind of hit or miss. So try it. If it's not working, try something else.
that's right.
All right. Um, so we do have a question, and this is a question that we always get. How do you determine what kind of budget and spend you're going to invest?
That actually I think is an easy part. And your budget should be very small early until you get some data and figure out what to spend. Your budget
Mhm.
for things that work should be unlimited. Your budget for stuff that doesn't should be zero. Your budget for stuff you're not sure about should be small, right? And that's sort of how it goes. And I think having this mentality of experimentation, forming a hypothesis, you run a test and you try to draw conclusions. And I think for me as an author, and I think a lot of people feel this, it can be very frustrating, and it is something that at least my brain is not really attuned to. Like I'm a fairly creative person and I can be very
Mhm.
focused, but I'm not great at multitasking and I'm not great at managing a lot of things. So like I'll run ads and forget about it and not check them out for months. I mean, so I come back in there like, what is this? And my naming conventions for my campaigns, I'm trying to get better, but it's like, what is this campaign even about? Like, what is this even trying to do? You go in, it's like these keywords, what was I thinking? And that was, a real waste. But so I think to protect yourself from that, you say, look, here are product targets or ASINs that I think are really relevant to my book. I'm going to go
Mhm.
out there and I'm going to spend, is it $5 a day or $20 a day? Um, and see what happens. I mean, it used to
Mhm.
be, I also think there are some nuances to Amazon advertising and sponsored products in which I think one thing to be aware of is it tends to spread your budget evenly over the campaign
Mhm.
keywords that you put
It
in.
does.
So yeah, let's say you put in 10 keywords that you think are promising for you, and you put in a daily budget of $10. One thing to keep in mind is it's going to prorate that over a monthly basis. So if it spends $2 today, it might be okay spending $12 the next day to get to $10 average. But it's a
Mhm.
little off subject, but that is how daily budget works. But let's say of those 10 keywords, one is books and one is alien invasion, science fiction, thriller books. Well,
Right.
books has this much volume, right? And then the other one has this much volume. So
Mhm.
having a $10 budget is going to make books serve tons of impressions and likely to get tons of clicks that are likely not very relevant. So I
Mhm.
think that the budget should be scaled to the anticipated impression volume. So if you think the keyword books is relevant to your book, likely want to put that in a campaign all by itself, and it's gonna. I would do a small budget for it just to see what happens. But
Right.
alternatively, if you have a lot of long tail keywords with low volume, you can do better at smaller budgets. And I'm someone who thinks that more targeted keywords, especially in the environment we're in, are far more advantageous. There's less competition. There's probably more conversion, and it's better all the way around. So anyway, long story short, I think small budgets. I think there's also one important note to make here, which is that in Amazon advertising console, you can download your search terms and see what people are searching for, what they click on, what they buy from, and you're going to see some stuff that is surprising in there. You're going to think, man, they bought my book after clicking on that one. And I think that there is some context there that's important, and that is that sometimes you'll have your existing fans see your book on another book that's totally random, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then they click it and they buy it, right? And so
Right.
yeah, so I think you have to use your own good sense when you look at this stuff and say, man, am I really relevant to this, literary women's fiction book? My stuff really isn't, but one of my readers was looking at it because my readers tend to be very well read. I mean, they read different genres.
Mhm.
My books are multi-genre. So anyway, just a note to say, always try to use your own good sense. And some of the stuff you see coming out of Amazon advertising, sometimes even for me, I'm just like, does that make sense? I don't know. I mean, that just was kind of random.
No, I think that that's a really good point, is that you might see an increase in your, or a better ACOS if you're really making sure that you're focused on advertising to the people that are going to buy your content but also to your point, you may see these random things and don't double down on something that's completely random and you're like, this doesn't sound right. So yeah, to your point, I would agree with that.
Yeah. You can roll the dice, but don't double down. I mean, that's
Right, there you go. Yes. All right. Um, Thank you for sharing all that. That was a lot of really amazing information. Um, so let's take some other questions on a little bit different topics. One of the questions that I'm seeing is your kind of what's your day to day look like, right? So do you have a schedule that you take, because you mentioned the fact that you forget about your ads for a while because you're not good at multitasking. So what does that look like for you? How do you make that successful for you?
yeah. Well, I'm the most productive in the morning, so I try to get up and write every day. When I'm drafting a book, I find that I have these big breaks that it's tough for me. I mean, it's tough to, and my books are fairly intricate, so the plots are ones that it's better if you write it, in a pretty consistent go, right? So my creative process is I'm either in one of two phases. One is like planning and research, and the other is drafting. And both are
Hmm.
equally painful, and that's how I like my job. I like it to be, as hard and as painful and as arduous as possible. But once I get my planning, my outline done, I will go and write that book, and then everything changes, like halfway through or a quarter of the way through. And so this is recursive cycle. But when I'm drafting, I try to keep going. I try to get that draft done as soon as possible, and then editing is a new level of misery for me because I have to go back and make the whole thing make sense and figure out all the problems and the continuity errors that I've made. But I tend to run out of steam about noon or a little after, and then
Hmm.
then I'll try to return emails, and sometimes I will. Um, start chewing on my fingernails and look at Amazon advertising and see what's happening. And, and I try to keep up with that. And we've been building a new house here in Raleigh. So that's like every day is a new dumpster fire for me to put gasoline on and try to put out, which
Right.
is really nice. I mean, that enhances my life greatly. But that's kind of how I do
Um,
it.
I couldn't imagine trying to write a book and build a house at the same time. My hat's off to you. That's a challenge that I would not take on.
Yeah, it's really miserable. Yeah, I tried doing it during a global pandemic. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
even
also not good.
better. Wow. Okay, I have no words to that. That's amazing. Um, so let's talk about editing. Everybody's favorite topic. Let's go back to that editing piece. Do you self-edit and then you have an editor and then beta readers? What does that look like?
I do, and I think the process is probably a one size fits none because like my editing process is like sort of dependent on my drafts, and I think other people I know write cleaner drafts, but mine
Hmm.
because of the plot threads and the stuff that I want to tie together, inevitably it's a mess when I get to the end, and then I have to go back to the beginning and incorporate what I learned by the end. And then
Right.
so it really feels almost like a second draft, like I'm rewriting it. And then I'll do a self edit, and
Hmm.
then we get the outside editor to look at it, and we find all new problems and all new levels of misery that you can go through when writing a book. And then there are three alpha readers who read it and give me feedback, and they find things that I never would have thought of. And there are
Hmm.
other like just sensitivity things like phrases I will use or things that I
Hmm.
am horrified once they point them out. But and so
Right.
that happens, which is also wonderful. And then the beta readers read it, and then we put it out there in the world for it to be
Hmm.
torn apart again.
So torn apart again. Let's go back to reviews. I think that's what you're alluding to. The reviews are kind of every author's love-hate situation. It's always good to hear what the readers are saying about your book, but then it's also challenging to hear what the readers are saying about your book. Um, can you share how you handle the feedback that you get from reviews?
Well, I think it gets easier, but I think initially, I mean, it is a love-hate. I mean, so many things with writing are a love-hate relationship. I mean, I think if you ask me, the sort of quintessential skills in this career are mental toughness to some extent,
Hmm.
and it's not, um, that's not as easy as it seems. Like you can be tough, and if you can become tough and become worse at your job, right? Like one of the
Hmm.
reasons I think people are able to write a good book is that they have some passion about something. They care about something and they care about
Hmm.
telling a story and leaving the reader better than they were before, right? And if you care less, you get worse at doing that job, right? So I think you have to, my opinion is you have to care a lot
Hmm.
to do well at this. I think, maybe you're happier if you care less, but I don't know that you're better. So reviews, I think as a new author, when you come in, there's nothing quite like it. I mean, if you write a book that you really care about, there's something I think psychological that happens. You invest some part of yourself in it. It's like
Hmm.
the Harry Potter series, one of my favorite series. I mean, at the end of it, the Voldemort, the bad guy, tears his soul in seven pieces and stores them in these objects, these Horcrux.
Hmm.
And I think for her, it was sort of like that. She had written seven books, and they were pieces of her. And part of the book,
Hmm.
part of the series was destroying these Horcruxes. And
Hmm.
so, as a word to authors, you have to expect your work is going to get completely destroyed if it's read at some volume, right? And so, and the trouble is that the alternative is no one reads it and no one destroys it, right? And that's not what
Hmm.
you want either. So I think that if you're, in my past career, we had drag out arguments all the time. We'd sit in a conference room and say, this is not correct. What you're saying
Right.
is not correct. And then, but you go home and, people get over it and no one really cares. But with
Hmm.
regard to books, I think if you care, you keep caring. It's like your kid or
Hmm.
something. So,
Right.
so I think that, with feedback, it gets easier. And I think you read them, and I think you get better at picking out the things people write about. And readers see things that I never saw. And I mean, they point out a lot of stuff that you can learn from. So I think
Hmm.
it's a long way to say, I think you as an author need to figure out where you are. If you're at a point where you can't handle the feedback, don't read it. And
Right.
don't let it hurt you. And just because if you stop writing, nothing else really matters. I mean, you've got to keep, if you want to do this as a career, you've got to keep going. And I
Hmm.
think you can't read the reviews and it is harmful to you, don't do it. And then if you need the feedback, if you're early in your career, and it does help a lot when you're early in your career, get someone to read them that you trust
Yeah.
and bring you back some feedback and say, look, your descriptions are way too long, or
Right.
you put way too much science and history in there, and that's how you lost a lot of readers in that book. When you write the next one, you need to truncate that stuff. So
Hmm.
I think figuring out like a lot of things in writing, figure out what works for you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think though that that's a really good call out. A good kind of first step is to have somebody else read the reviews. And what we're talking about is if you sell on Amazon, there's community reviews at the bottom where anybody who purchases it can leave their thoughts on your book. And those are powerful. That's powerful information to have. But to your point, initially it can almost be like a raw wound, and people are just picking at it. So it can be troublesome to initially read it. But to your point, if you have a team that you trust and somebody that can read it for you and give you that kind of feedback, overall feedback, I think that's helpful. Um, and I think that that goes back to the team. And we've alluded to this, and we're getting more questions about building your team. So we already know that you have an editor and then alpha readers. How many alpha readers do you have?
We have three of those, yeah, and then maybe 50 beta
Okay.
readers.
And what's the difference between an alpha reader and a beta reader?
I think it's the level of feedback. So the alpha readers are mostly retired editors that enjoy the books and provide feedback. So, we started with just, the editor and then beta readers. And then some of the beta readers really just went above and beyond. And so what we found is that this other layer of, if we have these people go through it, it's going to eliminate 80, 90% of what all the beta readers found. So from a workflow standpoint helps a lot, right? So you take out those items, and then the beta readers have a little easier time, and they're able, if you take out, I find that in the editing process, if you can take out like, well, here's all the grammatical stuff and the spelling, they're able to, beta readers will go in looking for something, right? And so you'll get feedback that you may not have gotten if they found a bunch of spelling problems. They'll give you more thematic or pacing or things that, bothered them, turns of phrase or whatever.
Right, right. So who else is on your team besides your editor, your alpha readers, your beta readers? Who else do you have?
Well, I think my wife would say, unfortunately for her, she's on my team, and she handles. We have a warehouse with like 100,000 print books, and so she handles that aspect of it. And I think to a large extent, the people on my team are Amazon. Like, the Amazon advertising group helps me a lot. Like, I depend on them to help me reach new readers, and yeah, that's about it. And who's on my team is something I've thought about a lot this year, and I've been trying to spend more time writing and less time, on advertising and the business and things like that. And I'm someone that's like looking for the answer of, with the changing environment we're in, what, who do I need staffing wise, and what makes sense.
Who does your covers? Do you do those? Do you have a team that does those, or do you have one artist that does all of your covers?
My UK publisher has been doing the last 3 covers, and I think they've done a good job. So in the UK, I'm UK and Commonwealth, so Australia, India, and the UK, I guess whatever territories they've got, they publish the books in a print-only deal, and then I retain ebook rights. But the UK publisher will source an editor for me, and then they do the covers. But in the past, Demanza has done covers for me, and then ebook launch, and then this cover here was an artist from Mexico that did some cover art. I think that's vintage 2014. And of course, I did my first cover, which I would not advise. I don't think you can get away with anymore. But
How quickly did you rebrand that cover?
Within months. I mean, literally within months. I mean, when the book took off, I was like, really got to step my game up. I mean, the cover was just okay, but it's sort of, things are a lot different now. Like, you need strong cover art, well formatted, well edited. It's not even optional anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. The initial investment is definitely your cover, your editor, and then you just mentioned formatting. There are a lot of authors that do their own formatting. They use some of the free tools or a different tool. Do you outsource that, or do you do it yourself?
I do it. The UK publisher formats our print editions, and then I use Vellum. Like, I'm on a PC, but I use VMware and run a Mac instance and just fire up Vellum. And the reason I do that is that, even after the whole editing process, like, I find that someone will come up with, oftentimes a legit typo or a perceived typo. Go into Vellum, change it, and upload it to KDP. It's just a lot easier and faster.
Gotcha. All right, let's get to some more of these questions. A ton of really amazing questions are coming through. This is a good one. Who guided your craft? So when you first started, you mentioned it took you 2 years to write that first book. Kind of who guided you on that journey, or was it just something that you did?
I mean, I think a lot of it was books that I bought and read. I mean, I bet I read every book on craft. I mean, I don't even want to think about how much money I spent on books. I mean, they're upstairs in my library. It's insane. But I also think for me, the best source was reading books that I enjoyed and trying to figure out, what do I like about this? Is it
Right.
And for me, a lot of it was the sense of adventure and mystery, and this sort of scientific mystery that I was personally fascinated about. I mean, I love reading books where I learn something and there is this sense of deep mystery. And so I think that craft books for me were really helpful. I think for a lot of people, it's critique groups or, seminars and stuff like that. I've always been somebody that likes to just be alone, trying to learn something, and then writing and experimenting. It took me 2.5 years because the first stuff I wrote was terrible. Like I knew it was terrible. Like I was, I reflected on it, like, this is not good. And why is this not good? Or what bothers me about it? And I
Right.
just kept writing that book until I felt like I can't get any better on my own. And I need to
Hmm.
release it and start getting feedback from the market. And I need to write a different book to get better. Um, but I think the most important things you're going to learn are specific to your craft and your own strengths and weaknesses. Every writer out there has strengths and weaknesses, and the trick is like you make a living with your strengths. Like there's going to be things that you're really good at, and you ought to lean into that. And the stuff that you're bad at,
Hmm.
you can get a lot. You can get better, but if you're not naturally great at writing dialogue, you're never going to be the best in the world at writing dialogue. It just doesn't work that way. We all just have a certain amount of talent, right? And there are
Right.
boundaries.
Okay. Um, what So this is really good. For somebody who's brand new, what is the one thing that you think one mistake that you made that they're like, that you like, here, I'll share this with you, learn from me, don't do this.
Oh, wow. I mean, the tough part for me is like picking out one mistake that you should zero
Oh,
in on. I mean,
all
look,
right,
I
top
think,
five.
how much time do we have left?
There you go.
So, yeah, for me, I released my book in March of 2013 into a genre, a sub niche that was severely underserved and
Right.
didn't have a lot of supply. The market is far different today. The market is arguably oversupplied, and the market is filled with books that are very high in production quality. The cover art is good, the formatting is good, the editing is really good. So if you want to have any chance in the market, I think that you know, you have to get the best that you can get in terms of whatever you can afford on cover art and editing. And, maybe if you can't afford to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on an editor, find other authors that can either and exchange manuscripts and edit each other and try to find things. Um, I think the other thing, so I mean, that's sort of mandatory. Like my thing of the homemade cover and my mom, who was a retired 8th grade English teacher, edited my book. I don't really think my mom did a great job, and that was okay back then, but I don't think today. And then I think the other thing I would say that I always had in my mind is, um, I think the market was different back then. We didn't have Amazon advertising and some of these other things. We were really just focused on, let me write this really remarkable, the best book I can. And if it's a success, things are going to happen. And I think keeping that in mind, I mean, I do think that there's this sort of argument about, quality versus quantity in the indie space. And I'm someone who's written 9 books over the course of about 9 years. And so I don't say that I'm right on the debate, but I think that you ought to critically look at the books that are succeeding in the market and try to reflect and think about where you fit in that landscape. I mean, in writing the best books you can, I think will be the wind at your back.
I think to that point, really good points. And one of the things you were able to go into an underserved genre, but we've also seen other authors who are writing things that they like and creating their own genre. I think Lit
Yes.
RPG is one that's an excellent example where it was something that just kind of wasn't known, but people enjoyed it, so they started writing in it and it worked for them. So I think that that's another avenue if you're finding, to your point, that some of the genres are a little oversaturated.
I totally agree with that. And I think that to me is, I'm writing in techno thrillers, but I do think my books are a little different in the marketplace, and I think they're differentiated enough to really succeed. I mean, I think you can get so far out there that that you shrink your market. But I also think if you trust your instincts, and if you're in an existing genre and are sort of adjacent to it or sort of straddling it, I really think that's where I personally think that's where you find the most happiness, because you're working on something that you believe in instinctively. I mean, this is good because you would read it. And I think there's a confidence
Right.
level there. And I think finding those untapped, those audience needs are really important. I don't think you find that looking at what's been published. I think you create something new. And I think there's more risk in it. There's no question. But when
Hmm.
it pays off a lot more.
Right. Right. Um, so we have a question from Seth. If you self-publish and the book doesn't take off right away, how do you decide if you should market harder or if you should give up the ghost?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I think at the crux of it is, why is the book not selling? And
Mhm.
so if the book is not selling because of something related to the book, then I think you've got to work on that. If the book is not selling because of something with your advertising, you've got to work on that, right? And so it's sort of like when a patient comes into the doctor's office, what symptoms do they present with, right? And so, well, what are
Right.
the symptoms of your lack of success? And I think, um, and sometimes as authors, we're too close to what we've created. I mean, there's no
Mhm.
question. And you need some honest feedback, and you can read the reviews and you can glean a lot from that. And then, sometimes, we see in the market books that are really good, but are positioned incorrectly. Like either they're in the wrong categories, they have the wrong cover or the wrong title or whatever. And I think, you have to figure out, like when I published my first book, The Atlantis Gene, like I said, that was the best book I could produce at the time. And it really took off initially. And I was
Mhm.
surprised by it. But there was no question about what I had to do. I hired a professional editor. I hired this cover artist. And
Mhm.
then we used the UK covers that came out after that because we thought they were better. And we kept improving. I released an updated version of that product. And the same year we released the Atlantis Plague, which was the follow-up to that. I mean, I think
Mhm.
in December it sold like 100,000 copies in the first month of release. It's just, I think that getting a sense of what's happening with your audience and what's working and not working
Mhm.
is at the end of the day the business that we're in. So I think the clues that you have are your reviews. You can probably get some good feedback from other authors and friends and family. If they're readers, I
Mhm.
think that's a good source of feedback. Um,
Mhm.
Doubling down on advertising is often the easiest thing to do, to go into Amazon advertising and raise your bids, add keywords, increase budgets, but
Right.
it is not a panacea, and sometimes it makes things worse.
Mhm. I think to your point, kind of changing one thing and then giving it some time to work to see if that's what changes it. If you change everything all at once, then I don't think, just from a business standpoint, you're not going to figure out what worked. So you're not going to be able
That's
to invest in that area more.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And it's hard not to, right? Like if you feel like your
Mhm.
ship is sinking, you're going to bail out any water you can see on the deck.
Pull
And I
all the
think
levers.
you pull all the levers, you fire everything at once. But I
Right.
think, and it's not to say that you can't do one or two things, but I think you have to pick the top thing. You have to say, look, I think that, either I've, you know, whatever the problem, there's some problems that aren't really solvable. Like if you wrote a book in a
Mhm.
genre that expects first person present, and you wrote it in third past or from the wrong POV, yeah, that's a big one, right? Like you might just live to fight another day or give up the ghost as the original
Right.
person that asked the question said. But I think, like you said, you figure out what is easy and what you think has the best chance of success. And but there is something to living to fight another day. And I think keeping a perspective of, you got to be a lifelong learner in this career. You have to sort of say, well, what do I see today and what have I learned from this and how do I
Mhm.
achieve greater success, or in my case happiness, tomorrow? What does it mean? Yeah.
I think that's excellent advice. Um, We had some questions about the custom text when we were back talking about ads. You mentioned creating custom text. Let's talk about that for just a minute. Can you give examples of what kind of custom text seems to work best for you? What is it
Yeah.
that you're trying to achieve with that?
For me, and there are people that are far better at Amazon ads than I am. So they may have, I would get several data points on this, what I would say. But for me, the ads that talk about the plot seem to work the best. Like for Winter World, my most recent book, it's like, um, you know, a new ice age and a shocking discovery will change humanity forever. And that's basically what the book is about. I mean, it's this large scale plot, this post-apocalyptic and this scientific mystery. And that ad text just sort of puts it all out there. So if you're looking for a quiet, atmospheric book, it's not that. Like, it's go to the movies with popcorn, big explosions, and mind-blowing twists that some people are not able to suspend disbelief for. And so I think that it's far better to get that out there and say, if you're looking for your next literary book, you have not found it. But so I think talking about the plot and the sort of, as you figure out what the boundaries are for readers, right? And you can look at reviews and you can just sort of look at the marketplace, right? And the books have some romance, but they're not. Romance is not the principal focus of the book. So saying that there's some romance, but it's not going to satisfy a plurality of romance readers, that sort of thing. So I would say focus on the plot and look for things that would disqualify readers, and maybe try to use that in your ad text.
I think that that's an excellent call out, is that not trying to use that everybody needs to read my book, but instead I want to focus on those that are interested in this content and really trying to find them.
Yeah, I mean, that's when I'm writing the ad text, I'm like, there's a person that reads this and clicks, are they likely to convert, right? And yeah.
Okay. I think we answered this question. How did you decide which editor? You mentioned that your the London team helped you find your editor. Is that an accurate statement?
Recently, so that's for the past, I think, 3 or 4 books. But initially, you're talking about when I first got started. Yeah. So I looked in the marketplace and I was like, well, who's editing these books that I'm reading? And so Hugh Halley's Wool was big, and I just emailed him and said, who edited your book? And David Gatewood, who's at lonetrout.com, is a great science fiction editor, edited the book and did a great job. And he's been doing my books for a long time. And he actually edited my most recent book, because the editor that had done the first 2 books in that series wasn't available, and we were up against it. But yeah. So I think looking into genre and figuring out who edits those books, and sometimes in the beginning of the book they'll list edited by.
So I think that that's a good call out, is reaching out to other authors. Do you have a group of authors that you interact with on a regular basis?
Unfortunately for them, I do. Yeah. And I think that's really important. I mean, I think this is a very lonely job. I mean, it is a wonderful career, and it's, for people that enjoy the work, it's great. I mean, I love every day. I enjoy being alone and creating something, but it can get to be too much. And I think if you're in a career where a lot of things are changing, it's really nice to talk to people who are going through the same thing. Just to say, am I going crazy here? Does this seem crazy? And the sort of struggles you go through. I think there's something really healthy about talking to it, with someone who's going through the same thing. So, yeah.
And how did you find that group?
Just mostly from stalking online, and then outside their house in a van, taking pictures with a telephoto lens at extreme distance.
Totally disclaimer, we don't suggest this strategy.
You'll need one of those things that garbles your phone when you call, but your voice when you call on the phone. But just a lot of it. Like I actually went to my first author conference. I went to NINC this year, which I think is a good conference to meet other authors, and then I've done some meetups with authors who are a little in the same either genre category or the same level, that are going through some of the same issues. And then, of course, Facebook is always a good place. Like I join groups that are centered around authors that talk about issues, and there's a ton of great information. I mean, as authors, as self-published authors especially, we do compete against each other, but I also think we're naturally inclined to help each other, because people are going through, to some extent, the same thing as you, and you see yourself. Like I see myself in startup authors that, it's tougher than it was, but it's still a great career and still, worth doing in my view. So.
I think that that's a good point. I have never met a group of authors that are just so kind and giving and willing to share their learnings, because a lot of the authors that we talk to, like you, started early on when there was no information and you just had to power through everything. So the fact that you're willing to turn around and share all of this knowledge is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the right thing to do, and I think, like I said, it helps me. I mean, talking to other people that are going through the same thing you are is there's something really helpful about that. So.
Mhm. All right, so I think we have time for one more question. So let me see if I can find a doozy. Um, Top 3 tips for brand new authors. What would it be?
Well, my number one piece of advice would be to figure out what you want from this. Figure out what success means for you. And I think it's easy to get turned around in the market, and it's easy to find a lot of people that say this is what success is for me, or this is what I'm trying to do. I think that if you have a mortgage and 2 kids in college and are still carrying debt from your professional education, your goals may be different than the retiree
Hmm.
who's a war veteran that has a story to tell that's really important to him. So I think you've got to figure out what you want from it. And I think you've got to be really honest with yourself. I mean, if you want to win awards and you want to go to conferences and that's really important to you, the strategies you employ may be radically different than someone that says, I need to maximize the amount of income that I'm making so that I can quit my job. So I think
Hmm.
figure out what you want from it. The other piece of advice I would have is figure out what you can do really well. And that can be very painful to discover. And the only way to really discover it is to write. Frankly, like you can learn and you can study it as long as you want, but until you start writing, you're not really going to get a lot more data and you're not going to get a lot
Hmm.
better. So you've got to write, you've got to reflect on that, and you've got to sort of figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are, and you've got to figure out how much you need to shore those up.
Hmm.
And then the third thing that I would say is safeguard, mind your perspective on the market, because this is something where certainty is in short supply. I mean, you go out, you release your book, and you feel pretty certain this thing is going to be the next big hit, or you feel certain that
Right.
it's CRAP, and the market is going to tell you what it is, right? And it's somewhere in
Yep.
between, frankly. And so I think you have to have this perspective of constantly learning and reflecting and saying, well, this is what I learned from this. I learned that readers don't like this aspect of my book, or they like this, or I learned that running sponsored product ads with categories does not work for me for whatever reason. It works for other
Hmm.
people. I don't know why. But thinking about why it works for them and doesn't work for you may or may not help you. But focusing on
Hmm.
the things that are working will absolutely help you, right? And so um, I think having that mindset has helped me a lot, and I think potentially would help other authors a lot. Those I think don't seem as concrete as negate your author name in an auto campaign and sponsor products, but I do think in the long term they help you more. It's my
Hmm.
view.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think those were really 3 very powerful suggestions. And we're at time, perfectly timed. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing all of your knowledge about ads and building your team. I think this was a really great session, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, thank you all for joining us today. Just a reminder, you'll get an email tomorrow with the link to the recording for today. Or if you can't wait that long, it will probably be posted to our YouTube channel tonight. So if you register, follow us on YouTube, you'll get an alert when that happens. And as always, happy publishing, everyone.